Hi, everyone. I am Taveri Crouch. I am with the Chicago Film Office, a division of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. We're so glad to have everyone with us today to dive into this informative, enlightening, and educating conversation on what it means and how it looks like to teach as a filmmaker and vice versa. I have with me today my partners in crime in collaborating on this event, this Career of Sustainability series is Bree Castellini with Seed and Spark and Peter Hawley, director of the Illinois Film Office. Bree, do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm Bree Castellini from Seed and Spark, and I will be on this panel, so you'll be seeing a lot of me today. Seed and Spark, if you haven't heard of us, is a crowdfunding and creative distribution platform that builds tools to help creators wherever they are in their creative journey.
Thanks, Bree. Peter?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you both, Bree and Taveri. I'm Peter Hawley, director of the Illinois Film Office, and this is our second discussion, as Taveri mentioned, and the first one was very interesting. And this one is particularly interesting to me because, as many of you or some of you know, I've been both a filmmaker for 30-some years and a college teacher for the last 25 years. And so this is an intersection of two things I'm very, very interested in. We had a prep session for this the other day, and I know some of the topics we're going to talk about are very, very interesting to me personally. And I've always said, and I said this in our prep session, that working professionals are the best teachers to me. I mean, you have one foot in the real world, you have one foot in the classroom. I always learn something from my students, and in theory, I hopefully teach them something. But I think this is a really great meeting place. And remember, the idea here with these discussions is to have career sustainability. So for people who, we're trying to build the industry here, and you can work on a production for 9 months and then have 3 months to teach for a semester if it's a class or not. So I really look forward to this, and thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Peter. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I'm having a hard time with my own audio, but that's okay as long as you're able to hear me. Thank you both for being such great partners in organizing and putting these events together. We're so thrilled to present you the conversation that is before us. I will leave and bring in our moderator, Inez Summer. Hold on just a moment.
Hi, so good to see everybody. Thanks to Taveri and Chicago Film Office, Illinois Film Office, and to Seed and Spark for organizing this panel. I'm going to be moderating today. I'm a Chicago-based documentary filmmaker, and I teach at Northwestern University in their radio, TV, film department. And I'm also the associate director of their MFA in documentary media program. So I work with a lot of emerging documentary filmmakers, which is lots of fun. I'd love to go around the room and have you introduce themselves. And why don't we start with Bree?
Sure thing. Hello again. It is me, Bree Castellini still. So in addition to being Seed and Spark's film community manager and teaching a lot through them, in addition to developing workshops and curriculum with them to talk to people about crowdfunding and outreach and pitching, I am also an adjunct professor at Long Island University, Brooklyn, which has a graduate program for television writing and producing that I actually also graduated from. So full circle moment there. And I am an adjunct professor, sort of thesis advisor for Stevens College. And in both cases, in both of these programs, I specifically focus on emerging media like web series and audio dramas.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bree. Missy, would you talk about like your filmmaking and where you teach?
Sure. I'm Missy Hernandez. I am a full-time faculty member at Columbia College Chicago, where I teach TV writing, screenwriting, and producing for cinema and television. As a filmmaker, I have worked in television as well as in independent features. I direct quirky documentaries and very almost experimental documentary hybrid features, as well as in the process of creating more traditional narrative work that focuses on underrepresented communities.
I really want to check out your hybrid work now. It sounds really great. All right, and then I'd love to hear from Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen A. Jones. Actually, I'm Steve Jones, but Stephen A. Jones for those people who creep around on IMDb. I am, at this point, called a professional lecturer at DePaul University. I'm a full faculty member, and mostly teaching creative producing, but I also teach a music video course. My career has been, I started as an animation director for commercials, things like Captain Crunch and McDonald's. Then I moved over into producing early work with a guy named John McNaughton. We've made eight feature films together, both studio and independent. And then I've produced some films for other independent directors. And I also still do music video and video wall content design and some documentary work for some rock and roll bands.
Cool. That music thread seems to go throughout your entire career. That's wonderful.
Well, I wanted to be a rock and roll drummer, so that caused me to never get an honest job. So I became a filmmaker, and then finally I became a teacher.
It's probably lots of drumming in your classroom. Anyway, as you know, we are not going to focus on pedagogy today, or how we can nurture our students, but more kind of look at it through the lens of how can independent filmmakers create sustainable careers. And one of the options is to be a teacher and have this parallel career track as a filmmaker. So my first question would be, how has your teaching influenced and supported your filmmaking, and vice versa? How do you bring that into the classroom, and how does the classroom affect your filmmaking? And maybe we'll start with Missy this time.
Sure. I think for me, my first feature that I was co-producer and co-writer of was released in 2020 during the pandemic. So being able to talk specifically to what does releasing a film look like now, or what is it going to look like in the future? How do you make a film when all this is going on? And the best way to answer that is, let me make a film while all this is going on, so I can really talk about safety and really talk about the hurdles that I wouldn't know about if I wasn't actively making. And I think that is something that is invaluable. It's something that my professors in school were also makers. So I think it's a matter of carrying on that legacy. And the best part was having them actually be able to say, this is what I wouldn't have done if I could do it again, or this is what I wish I had known. And then to be able to give that to my students in a really honest way that is from experience and not just a book.
Yeah, I think that's probably something that we would all agree on, how important that kind of creative experience is, and how that can influence how we teach in the classroom. Is there anything in terms of your teaching that has influenced what kinds of filmmaking projects you tackle?
For me, I started teaching high school and even middle school filmmaker summer programs. So a lot of my content is more geared towards either family or young people. But at the same time, really understanding how complex their understanding is and how they want to be treated as adults in terms of tough topics, but through a lens of youth and what they actually care about. So I think that has definitely inspired a lot of my filmmaking, and how it really centers on either community or community for young people.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Bree, would you kind of elaborate on the same ideas, the kind of cross-pollination of those two activities?
Sure, yeah. I mean, my teaching ethos has always been to teach the class I wish I'd had, especially since I at one time, or I currently teach at a program that I myself participated in a couple of years previously. And, no shade to the professor who taught the class that I teach now. But there were a lot of things that going through it myself, I was like, man, I wish I knew even a little bit more. So, you know, a lot of my experience out as a filmmaker myself, I really bring back to the classroom. I'm a big fan of like case studies, like instead of just saying like, you know, make a good pilot, here are the 3 aspects to making a good web series pilot. I like to bring in episodes of my work, of colleagues of mine's work, and really dissect it with the class. So instead of just saying like, here's an essay about how to write a shot list, like, let's make a shot list together. Here's, you know, go market your work. Well, let's actually put together a marketing plan together based on like what the concepts we've talked about. And I find that very helpful when people are very like practical and actionable with me versus sort of the, you know, high level, like, let's just think about things. I'm like, well, what do I do with this information? So that's a big part of the teaching that I always craved, and I hope that I am successfully bringing to my students. And then I guess on the flip side, the structural aspects of watching a lot of really bright, creative young people, and some people who are older than me, frankly, since I teach at the graduate level, when they go through web series, even ones that I have seen many, many times, and sort of break it down for an assignment I've given them, I always learn something new. Sometimes I learn new things about my own work. And I think that it's a really useful practice to, instead of just thinking, oh, I know everything, you know, I'll just watch things for enjoyment now, actually having to like study things again and watch other people study things again always brings up new insights about structure and craft and story that I don't think I would get if I was not in the classroom.
Wonderful, thank you. And Stephen.
What part of what Bree just said, I could certainly elaborate on. I backed into the job as a movie producer, sort of inadvertently. I was a director, and so therefore there were lots of basics I never learned because I didn't go to a traditional film school. I went to the Institute of Design and had a degree in design, did some animation work. But the next thing I knew, I was producing movies, and within 2 movies, I was producing a movie with Martin Scorsese as my boss, and Robert De Niro, and Bill Murray, and Uma Thurman. And you could show me the budget or the list of people working on the show, or I'd go to the rap party, for example, and somebody would come up and say, "Hi, I'm the lead man." I had no idea what a large portion of the people on the crew, what their jobs were, what their titles were, because I sort of backed into the whole job. So as I learned by doing, but also in class, there are parts of producing that I didn't have to participate in directly, but I have to teach my students. So I had to go back and learn, not go back, go forward and learn the other aspects of producing. I've never had to, for example, pitch a movie. Well, not really have to pitch a movie and get it set up that way. I teach my classes and I say, here's a business plan. Here's a pitch deck. I never made a movie. I've made 12 or 13 movies. I never made a movie that way. So I had to figure out, well, what is that exactly? So as I'm teaching the students, I'm learning how all of that stuff works as well.
Yeah, I think that is so true. I assume for most of us, that if we have to teach something, we have to dig so much deeper in order to present it well to our students. So kind of that combination of experience that we bring, and then the kind of more theoretical aspect of it, I think that makes for such a rich kind of soup that we then as filmmakers hopefully also, bring that to our own practice. Other aspects of this that when we talk about the teaching supporting the filmmaking, so we're talking more about the creative aspects and so on. What about the sustainability aspects of this?
What's the question exactly?
The question is, why not pursue just a job in production? Why embrace teaching as a career path, right?
Well, I mean, for me, there certainly as a producer, I can have 10 or 12 projects in the works and nothing that's going forward in production. So part of the teaching is here's something else to do, and here's something also that is an income and besides. And also it's a good way to keep your eye on the industry. I have students who've since graduated who've been in varying degrees of success. One who's gone off he won South by Southwest Audience Award last year, a guy named Alex Thompson. with a movie called St. Francis. It was long listed and even in the Academy Award considerations. So that's something where you can say. And Alex, I know, is also still teaching, because it's until you get to a certain level. If you're a crew member, can work all the time, but creatives, there can be incredible amounts of time between jobs. And I work with directors, and for a while I was working only with one director. Well, he would take a year and a half or two off. What am I supposed to do during that time? So it helps have a sustainable career by teaching in a lot of ways, in many circumstances. Again, the creative or producing directing in particular, it's not built for you to work one job right after another. It just seldom works that way. Again, crew members, it's a different story. Cinematographers, editors, they can work job to job to job.
Really valuable insights. Thanks. Anything that you would like to add, Bree or Missy, to this kind of, why have that dual career? Why not just stick with one?
I mean, you need something to pay the bills, and I just on a straight up, I have to pay rent somehow while I'm, pursuing my filmmaking career. And for me, teaching currently is kind of a side hustle, although I would say 90% of all of the work that I do is teaching. It just happens that like traditional teaching is only sort of part-time work for me right now to supplement. So certainly the money helps. Schools didn't shut down in the same way that a lot of industries did during the pandemic. So that helped quite a bit. Production shut down, but still had to teach, even if you were doing it via Zoom. So, that's certainly very helpful. Like, education's always going to be here. So if you can carve out a space for yourself in the education, industry, whatever that looks like, whether it's traditional, whether it's college, high school, summer programs. I also freelance teach for the Hoo Ha Ha community, the women in comedy community, founded by Elizabeth Banks. So there's always going to be opportunities to teach people things, and cultivating a skill of being a good teacher and a good curriculum designer is something easy to fall back on that still keeps you in the entertainment industry. And, like Stephen said, like keeps you abreast of trends and what's going on. But, is more consistent and pays the bills better. I will also say I've had students hire me after my class. One of my first students, she decided to keep making the web series she developed in my class. And she crowdfunded with my help at Seed and Spark, actually. And part of the money was to spend to pay me to help direct and edit the rest of her web series. So, sometimes cool things happen. Sometimes your students end up being multi-talented and then they give you more work. It's a wonderful system.
Fabulous. Missy, anything you wanted to add to this?
Yes, I consider myself primarily a screenwriter in a different way, but sort of similar. I fell into producing because I was hyper organized, and fellow writer directors were like, "Hey, can you produce this?" And I was like, I guess so. But for me, having the schedule of teaching has been really helpful in being able to organize my time so I can rewrite that feature, and I can do another pass in that pilot and package it, and learn how to do a better package by having to teach how to package projects. And it's something that I would not be able to do if I was on the path of associate producer to executive producer in television. It's not something I could do if I am working a 16-hour workday, because that sometimes happens when you are a producer on the production team. It's not a normal schedule with a 12-hour turnaround when you are in charge of those things. And it's fun and it's exciting, but I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do for my lifestyle and what I wanted to do moving forward to pay the bills, that kind of workload and intermittent working. So it's something I love doing in the summer if I'm doing a project of my own or somebody else's that I feel really passionately about. But having a set schedule, so I know this is when I grade, this is when I write, and I can balance more effectively that way.
Great. I feel there are lots of different takeaways from all of your kind of responses, be it that it's a great way to bridge between jobs, that it's a good way to kind of, you're almost creating a kind of this yearly schedule, Missy, it seems like, this is the time I'm doing these kinds of things. During this time, I'm really just devoted to teaching and so on. So lots of kind of practical aspects to this. I think we should also kind of elaborate a little bit on the different types of positions there are, because they come with different benefits and responsibilities. So adjuncts have a different role than somebody who is on a term contract or is a non-tenure track faculty member like myself, or I think Steve too, versus somebody who is on a tenure track, which is the case for you, Missy. Could one of you maybe tackle and describe the differences for our viewers?
I mean, I'm happy to do some of it. When I started teaching, I never had the intention of going for tenure, and at my advanced age now, I don't even consider it. But the adjuncts are teaching a specific class. They're brought in. They have no. They don't get benefits. They get paid just for the class. Term faculty, depending on your arrangement, every year, or depending on your contract, could be a couple of years, but you're up for review. But you're a pardon me, full-time faculty with benefits, steady paycheck. A tenure track, when you're tenure track, which if Missy, if you are, then it's a lot of extra work. There's a lot of things you have to do to make yourself presentable and get tenure. So it's almost like having a job and a half, from what I've observed of the people I've worked with who've gone for tenure and gotten it.
Missy, could you maybe speak to the tenure track kind of aspect of it?
Sure. I think it's a little different. It's a little different in different departments, depending on what it is you're teaching. For me, it's there's an evaluation, and if you're in a more academic route, it would be your teaching is reviewed, and then your scholarly work is reviewed. For me, that's also supplemented with artistic endeavors. So the films that I'm creating, the scripts that I'm working on, that goes into consideration when I'm up for tenure or up for different reviews. And then there's also service to the college, which is a lot of the extra work that Stephen was referring to. So things like serving on committees, search committees for new hires, things like judging student film contests within the school. There's a lot of different things at play. So it is a lot of work, but it's really about what is building the college. So there's curriculum building, there's curriculum redesign, which happens a lot for our industry because things are shifting so much. With the switch over to streaming platforms, distribution has changed. So how do we teach that and incorporate the new realities into what it is that we teach so that our students are prepared for the world that they're going to enter and the industry that they are studying as it is shifting so quickly. So there's a lot of work in research, but also in practice to keep on the forefront of what's happening so that our students are really prepared.
Great. So I think, for folks who are listening to this and are wondering, would I be interested in teaching? In some way, they have to make the choice first, do I want to mostly work in the industry and maybe just, teach a class here or there, give back, stay connected with young people and so on. So for them, the adjunct route might be the best way because it's also more flexible. For others, then you're really making a commitment, right? If you're a tenure track faculty, it's a full-time job. It's not just, I'm just showing up for those 4 hours a week or something, right? So I think that people have to be aware of that. They can't just phone it in, right? So it is a full career choice. And then the other question that's kind of attached to that and that's already coming through the chat is like, do you need an MFA or PhD, a terminal degree in order to teach? And maybe we'll go around the room to get a response. Bree, would you start us off?
Yeah, so I have the incredible privilege of never having to actually apply for a teaching job. The same way that it sounds like Steve fell into producing, I kind of accidentally became a teacher when there was some faculty turnover at the program that I graduated from. They found themselves in need of a digital media teacher, somebody who had experience making web series and doing fairly well in them. And that's not very many people, certainly not that are based in New York. So the previous program director who had accepted me into the program called me up and was like, hey, are you interested in teaching this class? And I said, sure. And then they said, cool, you start, in 2 weeks. So I just sort of I was sent a syllabus. I didn't like the syllabus, so I rebuilt it and then kind of went from there. And then I got my Stevens teaching job as a result of the new program director for the LAU program was the previous program director for the MFA in screenwriting program over at Stevens. And they were in need of some thesis advisors for students who are working on web series. So once again, I have this very, very niche, very unprofitable in other areas expertise in web series and in emerging media storytelling. And because the educational world is fairly small, Missy and I actually have another connection in common, even though who knows how that would have happened otherwise. I kind of just get passed around anytime someone's like, we need a digital media professor. Can you teach remotely? And I'm like, sure, yes, absolutely. And I kind of go back and forth. But I also do have an MFA in writing and producing for television. And I imagine it would be slightly harder for me to fail upwards had I not had that. I also know from friends who are going the more traditional teaching route that especially when you're applying for positions, not having a PhD can often be a hindrance if you do not already have a pre-existing relationship with someone on faculty. But I think Steve and Missy can probably speak to that a little bit better than I can.
Yeah, Steve, maybe you start us off.
From what I've seen, so for example, I have throughout the years I've been teaching, MFA students come and sit in my office and I always say, why are you getting MFA? And if they say because they want to teach, I go, okay. If they say something else, I say, well, there's probably just as much benefit going out in the world and working as there is continuing your education if you are getting an MFA in film and you've already gone through the undergraduate program. A lot of times you get MFA students who have not had undergrad filmmaking experience, so it's good for them to be in the MFA program.
Yeah, so, I didn't have undergrad film experience. My MFA was the first time I did anything screenwriting. I'd never written a script before getting into that program.
Yeah, it's to me it's kind of crazy in a way that they'll drop somebody in who just doesn't know what a camera is or what a screenplay is, and they're going for their MFA, and they have other students who've been intensely studying film for 4 years who are now feeling why do I have to share my time with this person who's not film knowledgeable? But I do, from what I've seen of of some of the students who've gone out into the world, you need that MFA to get a teaching job somewhere else. Otherwise, you are relying on the fact that the school has a sudden need for a specific skill set that they can go into the professional class and bring people out. When I started at DePaul, the film program grew so rapidly that they didn't have the time or the bodies to do searches for people with MFAs in every department. So they would go get professionals who are already in the industry. I also, of course, think that there's something to be said for having people who work in the industry come in and teach, because they'll teach much more of the reality as opposed to the theory of filmmaking.
Missy, is there anything you'd like to add from your perspective?
I think it really, it depends. For us at Columbia College Chicago, if you intend to teach MFA students, you yourself need to have an MFA. I think that's pretty standard for most schools. There is a loophole if it's a professional who is so renowned or has such high achievements where you don't necessarily need an MFA. A few of my professors in my MFA program did not have MFAs, but they won Venice or something to that degree. Mm-hmm. So you understand that this is somebody who knows the art and craft and happen to also be excellent teachers in the classroom. So I think another reason to pursue an MFA would be for those kind of connections, and also the flexibility to potentially teach at that level. Because while you're in an MFA program, there tends to be teaching training in the form of being a teacher's assistant and being able to observe and work closely with the professor in that regard. And oftentimes, MFA programs have teaching fellowships where you get to teach an undergraduate class in the specific field that you would be interested in teaching after you have your MFA.
That's such an important point. I actually oversee the teaching assistants in our program. So they get trained to teach all the labs and so on. And I think when they apply for teaching jobs, once they have their MFA, it's a big leg up that they can already put teaching experience on their resume. So that's a huge benefit, right? Bissy, I think you had also mentioned about teaching in settings that are outside of typical academic settings. Would that also be considered a positive?
Yes, I think so. Even before I was pursuing my MFA, it was mostly volunteer work in different arts organizations in New York, in underserved communities, teaching theater and writing musical theater, and that helped when I was applying to get the teaching assistant positions when I was in grad school, because I've worked with young people. And then from there, those teaching assistant positions helped me get summer teaching jobs in film and in film summer camps. And then from there, when I was actually looking for teaching positions, it was clear to a lot of folks, my professors, other classmates, that I wanted to pursue teaching as part of my path. And so that's how I heard about teaching positions. People would send me posts. People would say, hey, they're looking for somebody who can teach this at this school. And sometimes it didn't work out, or it was in a city that I didn't have the capability to go to. But just knowing that there were opportunities available and people actively looking for new tenure track faculty members was great to know, because I knew it wasn't a pipe dream or something that could maybe happen if you're lucky, that there are pathways and different platforms specific to people looking for education jobs. And that was super helpful. And being able to pass that knowledge on to other classmates or alumni from my program that are interested in teaching as a pathway has been really helpful as well. Because I can answer the question, have you heard of teaching positions, or where should I look? But it starts with letting people know that you're interested in becoming a teacher and being open to opportunities that aren't direct to tenure track, maybe that might be a summer program or a 5-week program that could really help you gain the experience that you'll need.
Great. So I think for folks here in Chicago, if you're interested in building up kind of your resume around teaching experience before applying for those jobs, folks could, for instance, approach the Community TV Network, Chicago Filmmakers. We have a number of media arts centers where people can teach, one particular course, and those are wonderful classes. So, if I were looking for a teaching gig now and I didn't have experience, that's how I would start. Build that experience up. And you had mentioned summer camps. There are a lot of summer camps that are where teenagers learn how to do media. Again, Chicago Filmmakers has one. I think there's some in the suburbs also. So I would just try and get on the radar of these organizations and say, hey, I'm interested in this. I have this expertise, and see where that leads. You also mentioned something about jobs that you came across that were in other cities. Bree or Steve, any thoughts on that when somebody wants to get started? Should they consider moving maybe to a smaller market?
I think it's funny. Filmmaking, the thing is, as we were going along, filmmaking has been a growth industry over the last decade or so. So jobs in the film industry it's been a growth industry, and jobs teaching has been a growth industry. So even though there's a limited number of schools here with openings for teaching jobs, because all around the country, film schools have popped up, or film departments and universities have popped up, more and more need staff. So I think people have to be open to going somewhere else. There's just not that, there's not that many rooms on the faculty in Chicago to take all of the people with MFAs coming out now. But I have, for example, I have students who, and I know this because they ask for reference letters. So every year I'm getting hit by a couple of students who are saying, could you write me a reference letter? And sometimes they're asking, I keep getting links because they're applying to all of these different colleges or universities. So you would have to be open to move. And if you're a professional filmmaker, you're moving around the country anyway. I mean, in my career, I've made movies in Calgary and in Florida and Los Angeles and New York. It's part of the gig, so it shouldn't put you off to have to move somewhere else, I don't think.
Bree, any thoughts on that?
I think the Stephen and Missy kind of covered it. Like, I mean, if you are serious about teaching, or if you're serious about any career, you have to be willing to move for it, because, you know, now more than ever, location matters. Even if it's not New York, LA, you kind of have to physically be somewhere. Although I'm hopeful that that's less of a case after COVID. I know I recently moved away from New York City, where LAU Brooklyn is based, but I was talking to the program director and I was like, thanks so much for having me. You know, I'll be sad to not be able to teach next year. And he's like, wait, hang on, why not? What if you just stayed on? I mean, we've been doing half remote this year anyways. Yours is a once a week class. Would you be interested in continuing to teach remotely, regardless of where you end up? And I was like, absolutely, I would love that. And so I do think that in some ways, COVID has had a silver lining in not just in the teaching industry, but in the entertainment industry, realizing that there is talent elsewhere. And so if you need to be one place to stay around family or pay your bills, there are opportunities that you can achieve, without having to leave where it makes sense. So I think that's sort of the flip side, is that in some cases you don't need to move anymore, even if a program or an opportunity is based somewhere else.
Good point. I know that a lot of my, former grad students who have found teaching positions, they start with smaller colleges and even more rural areas, but it doesn't mean that they will spend their lives there. Maybe they'll do several years and then they'll be in an even better position to apply for something that's maybe closer to an urban area where they'd like to live. So
also, cost of living is down. So when you're just starting out, that's probably a huge blessing, and it'll allow you to spend more of your money on the films that you're making, looking forward to the larger filmmaking career aspirations that you have.
Where would you guys look for teaching jobs? I think both Steve and Missy had mentioned like knowing somebody or, getting recommendations directly, backing into teaching because somebody needed you. Where are there some websites or other kind of online resources that you could recommend if you don't have those connections?
I would have to ask my students, because they're the ones that I should, we should get one of them on here and they could tell us how they went about the job search. I don't know exactly if there's a listing anywhere for faculty. There must be some kind of a information pipeline that I don't have access to or know about.
There is, it's sort of like a job search. They have all these different ones, but there's one that is education specific. But I feel like with cinema and television, they're also posting in non-specific to just education, because they do want folks that are creators or have that experience. So you might find job postings on a normal job search site, but being able to look at both is going to be helpful, because it's just another platform where you might find a connection. But I think that it's always word of mouth. And if you want to be a professor, ask your professors, because we talk to people who teach in different cities and in different countries. And there are networks where we're finding that out. I was on a diversity hiring panel of how do we get more diverse professors into our programs and willing to stay in the profession. So these are conversations happening internationally of how to build our programs better. So they are on the lookout, and if you talk to professors, they're going to have access to that information.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've seen many times some of the professors at DePaul will put a job posting up on Facebook. Like, is anybody looking for this kind of job? Because it's open. I think in general, a professor wants their students to have a job when they get out. So as soon as they get the information, they'll post it somewhere. LinkedIn's another one where they do that.
I think I would also recommend Chronicle of Higher Education. They have teaching job postings from all over the country and internationally. And then there's the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium. So that's HERC, and they also post teaching jobs. And you can just put in your search the keywords like media or film, because it's for all. all teaching positions. So I think in addition to the word of mouth, which seems really important, to also be aware of these like big online resources could be helpful for folks just to get also a feel for it, like what are they looking for in these positions, right? Great. Any advice to aspiring teachers?
Have some children first. They work for me anyway. I don't have any. Well, just sort of try to make it interesting and try to imagine what things you can teach your students that they might not get. I go back to coming from the professional side and teaching from experience-based realities as opposed to theory. I always have to make a speech to my classes saying, I know this is going to sound like the worst job in the world because I'm going to just only show you the things that have gone wrong that need to be fixed or attended to. So, it's more like along the lines of if you can bring some real experience, whether it's your own or you find some, and give that to your students, it's going to be very helpful. I know when I went to design school, nobody ever actually said, here's what actually entry-level design job is going to be like. You're going to be in a little cubicle with a pen. An entry-level film is going to be, here you are, you're going to be standing out in the street blocking traffic. Unless somebody tells you that, you may just think you're going to graduate and become a director or just graduate and become a producer. So that would be my advice would be, try to make it real for your students as real as you can.
Let me see any words on this, and also we are kind of a little bit Chicago centric in this today. I know that you actually grew up here and then studied in New York and then came back. So any insights on can you make a sustainable career here in Chicago?
I think so. I got here a few months before the pandemic hit, but at the same time, I've been more productive than I have been since before I started this full-time tenure track position. I released a feature and I shot another feature during all this. So I think it's shifting expectations and being open to listening to what it is you really want to do and the lifestyle that you want to create for yourself. Doesn't have to fit what you've been told being a filmmaker is supposed to look like through the lens of Hollywood and social media success of what that is supposed to be. And I think when I realized, hey, my stories are more suited for Chicago, they should take place in Chicago, I should make them here, why not move there and be able to know that I'm writing for the city, I'm in this city, and this is where I'm going to shoot it because there's resources here. So a lot of it is giving people, my students especially, a lot of them don't necessarily want to go to either coast, and that's a question they have. Can I be a filmmaker somewhere else? Do I have to live in LA? And the answer used to be, well, you have to go to LA pretty often, at least for meetings. But now a lot of meetings might be happening on Zoom anyway, at least in the early stages. So everything's sort of shifting. And I think the more open we are to other pockets and hubs of production and creation, the more interesting our storytelling can be, is really where I'm coming at it from. And being open to that as a professor as well. Think of what you can bring to students who also don't want to necessarily live in a big city. So what can you bring and what can you inspire wherever you are based on what speaks to you? It's not necessarily what's going to speak to students, but they're going to recognize, wow, this person is following what's right for them. Maybe I can do that, what's right for me. So I think that is a really one powerful way to connect to students that is a little off what the norm may have been before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially for independent filmmakers, it's really important for us to break out of these kind of preconceptions and kind of reconfigure what we want, right? So I'm really interested in this whole issue of sustainability for Midwest filmmakers because we often feel so left out. But, you know, you're kind of showing us, no, we should make that a strength, right? That we have very particular stories here and that we can make a career here.
And also on a practical level, you know, everybody gets in their mind, we have to go to Hollywood, and not as much New York, but we have to go to Hollywood, and then secondary would be New York. And I always say, what do you anticipate is going to be there that's going to be of great benefit to you? Aside from the offices of the distribution companies, films are made on most of the time on location, some other city or some other place out in the world other than Los Angeles and New York. So yes, there's some benefit to being there because you can network with the other 10,000 filmmakers in that city, or you can be working somewhere else like Chicago where there won't be 10, 20,000 film workers. There'll be a smaller group. It's easier to network. What we don't have is the foundation of funding and distribution here. Those things are, you know, bi-coastal for the most part. But again, with Zoom and social media and that stuff, it's not that critical to be in Los Angeles so that you can go to a meeting in an office all the time. I mean, which is really what the purpose is. Again, I've made one movie that was based in Los Angeles, and I've gone to others, worked on others where we had to maybe do post in production there. But to have lived in Los Angeles, to have my career was not necessary. It was all Chicago-based.
Bree, as somebody who lived in New York and now relocated to Colorado, maybe you can give us your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, I moved to New York to go to my graduate program, and I am a small town girl. I went to college in a small town. I grew up in a small town, and then I moved to New York City within a month of never having been on my own like that before. And I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I was in New York City for my early 20s, and now in my late 20s, I'm very glad to not be in New York City. I admit I am moving to LA in the next couple of months, and I have sort of drank the Kool-Aid in terms of, it seems like that's where I need to be, especially if I want to be on the writing development side, especially in television, because that's where things are happening. But I am also hopeful that that's not my end all be all. You know, I'm hopeful that I'm not going to be there for long. The dream is to have a farm in Oregon and occasionally commute if I need to be in person. So I'm going to do my best to work for that. But do you mind if I answer the question about advice for teachers? Because I've been thinking about it as you guys have been talking, and something that I realized recently is that all the best teaching advice that I have gotten or learned on my own is also the best directing advice that I've ever gotten. And so it's sort of two-part. The first is making sure that your set or your classroom is a place where people feel comfortable experimenting and feel comfortable failing. I think one of the most beneficial parts of going to film school when you have that conversation of is it worth it, is that you have a space to get weird and try things you wouldn't try and fail and try again and fail in a place where, the stakes aren't so high if you do fail, and making sure that your students don't feel foolish for that, or making sure that your people on set don't feel foolish for failing because they tried something different is so important, because it fosters their curiosity and their creative problem solving and their ability to look at, all right, now I definitely don't want to do that again, but I'm glad I now know why not, versus it just being an abstraction. And then the other piece of that is not having all the answers, at least not at first. This was a critical piece of directing advice that I eventually learned, and it serves me well in the classroom as well. When people ask you questions, they want an easy answer. They want you to just tell them what to do. And I don't think that sets them up for success as a student or as a crew member. So usually it's actors in this case, actors saying, why does my character say this? Instead of just giving them an answer, if you're the writer director, of course you have an answer, but they're a professional, they're not your puppet. So what do you think? Why are you confused by this? Not in a passive aggressive way, but genuinely, what's your thought process? What's not working for you about this line? If I wasn't here, what would you answer? And learning their thought process and letting them come to their own conclusions can sometimes reveal, a failure in your part in your script, or reveal that something hasn't been well communicated about the motivations of their character. And the same is true in the classroom. Instead of a student, asking you a bunch of questions and you just giving them answers, say, well, why do you think this pilot got picked up and this one didn't? Why do you think that this is a successful cold open and this isn't? Instead of me just telling you, well, it's because, you know, it was under 3 pages and blah, blah, blah. Like, you have an intuitive sense. So I want you to be able to flex your critical thinking muscle and answer some of these things yourself. And then we can talk through, you know, what I would have said and what you have said, and it'll be a far more productive conversation. And I think that those two pieces of like not having the answers and making it a safe place to fail is invaluable on both sides of being a filmmaker and being a teacher.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great thing to be able to tell your students to just go out there and think of other things. You know, there's rules for screenwriting, and there's rules for editing, and there's the 3-act structure, and there's all of this stuff. And you can always go find incredibly successful pieces of work that broke every single rule. You have to remind your students that for all of the pounding you get as to this is how it supposedly works, the rule breakers are the ones who are just as successful a lot of the time.
Very true. So I think we're at this point in our discussion where we'd like to open it to audience questions, and I'll have to ask Tavery if any questions have come in.
I see
There's a little bit of a delay, everyone. So if you've been asking questions and we haven't noticed, we might have just not seen them yet. There's about a 30-second delay.
You can see some in the chat.
Yeah, there
and
was
I
a
think
couple from earlier.
I incorporated a lot of what they were saying into our questions here. I think the last one here was about, you know, our industry as a sustainable industry, you know, hiring folks as independent contractors rather than full-time employees. So that really doesn't pertain to teaching as much as to just the film industry in general. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, from my own experience as a freelance cinematographer, camera people are rarely on staff. I mean, it's maybe editors, but it's been for a long time.
It's one of the things that when people say, they'll ask me, do you have a production company? And I always have to think about it for a minute. It's like, well, what do they imagine that is? That there's an office with a cinematographer and an editor and a costume designer and a production designer. It's all a la carte. It's the nature of the industry. And somebody in the chat has asked a question about, you know, well, I can't work all the time here. That's less and less true in Chicago now that we have CineSpace and we have so much film work going on now. But it's a la carte industry. You can't be kept on, you can't have a 200-person crew kept on salary when you're not filming. That's just not sustainable. It's the nature of it. It is a freelance industry. It's the nature of it. And it's, I don't want to pick on the person that asked this question, but I also want to say, if you can't figure out how to adapt to that, the choices are you move to a place that has even more production, which is LA or New York, or you have to do something else. It is a freelance industry.
It's slightly different with television production.
Mm-hmm.
They're longer contracts because oftentimes for crew, they might cycle in directors, or they have a pool of directors that they will work with for a given series. But with crew, especially with cinematographers, it's going to be the same 1 or 2 cinematographers because they want to keep a consistent look. And television is the writer's medium. So writers are going to have contracts. If you're on a network procedural that has 24 episodes, you're going to have longer contracts and you're going to be working a lot more consistently. But on a lot of these streaming platforms, they're much shorter contracts because they're shooting entire seasons back to back, or they're getting a shorter order of episodes. So the contracts are smaller and smaller. But there is potential for longer contracts and sustainability in television, but it takes a while to work up to that. I have a friend who shot my first feature and did about 40 shorts while we were in grad school, has shot about 10, 15 features now in the past 4 years. And just now got a job on a television series and is going to have that sort of paycheck that is, and sustainability because it has a considerable order, and it's got a season 3 order and is in season 2 now. So he's like, I can breathe a little bit, about to start a family, it's consistent, but it takes work to get to that consistency, and a lot of hustling in terms of doing the short films or doing the low budget indie features to have that resume that gets you the interview and potential job like that.
As well as the connections, like,
Yes.
not only are you building your resume, but you're meeting people who, may get you hired in the future or who may hire you.
Yeah, and it's definitely different in documentary, where oftentimes if we work on a longer project, we're not filming the entire time. We might be doing 2 days in this month and then 2 months break and then 5 days and so on. So nobody is really on staff or has a longer contract for that. I think the editors who often, work half a year or a year on something, for them it looks a little different, but anybody on, in production, that will be shorter gigs. So I think the person who asked this, they should think about, what direction of which part of the industry to go for in some way. So what you're sharing about the TV industry, so maybe they should go in that direction if they really, can't live with the anxiety that comes with being a freelancer. Anxiety, where's my next paycheck going to come from? So they have to kind of also assess who they are as a person, or maybe their partner has a steady job and that will allow them to kind of ride out the ups and downs. So all those things are, not automatic, but people have to kind of reflect on that. So anything in closing? I don't see any more questions from our audience, but anything that you'd like to share in closing? Maybe a favorite teaching moment?
I'll jump in with one. I had a student come in who hadn't done any kind of production. And the first class he came to that I was involved with him was a music video class. And here's a guy who hadn't shot anything, hadn't written anything. And by the time he was done with that class, he created a very nice little piece of work. But then and I'm not saying it's me, the experience for him inspired him so much that he went and learned everything else, came back to grad school. And he's one of these people that just sent me referral notices for the colleges that he's now attempting to teach at. So that, that was kind of a rewarding thing to know that. And I just remember him being, well, here's the guy that has no experience. He's in my music video class. He has to do video. This is not going to go well. At the end of it, he was excited. The project turned out well, and he just zoomed.
I have a pandemic era teaching moment that I don't think I would have been able to experience under any other situation. One of my thesis advisees who I taught first year an acquisitions, development, and presentation class, who I helped learn. I taught her how to acquire the rights for a story that she would then develop into a script, with the idea of turning into a thesis. And she had to readjust her entire script and plan to be able to shoot under the COVID restrictions of only 15 minutes for the entire day without a mask in the large studio. And she had to be remote during production. So we're on Zoom. So I'm seeing her face and I'm seeing what the camera's seeing, and then I'm seeing the set in another square just to make sure everybody is keeping the adequate distance. And there was a moment that I knew was the moment she decided that was most important to her to capture for her story to work. And I was watching that happen, and I was watching her face and tears just streaming down because she was watching the culmination of a year and a half and a moment that she had dreamed of come to life. And I was watching both moments at the same time, and it was beautiful. And I don't think it wouldn't have existed in that way if it weren't for everything being on Zoom. But I was so honored to witness that moment, having been there from the beginning.
Lovely.
Cool.
Yeah, all of my best teaching moments are when students who come in who are older than me, who I'm teaching about like YouTube and web series, are like, who is this young idiot in here talking about the internet? And then by the end of the class, they're like, that was really fun. Thank you so much. But a standout one from my last class is a student who kind of came in and like the first class announced, like, I'm not interested in making a web series. Like, I'll do it, but I'm not interested in this at all. and the end of the class being like, that was so much fun. I can't wait to keep making episodes. And she sent me an email saying, and I also want to thank you for making me feel like not stupid when I asked questions. Thank you for making the classroom feel like a place where we could just talk and there was no judgment, because that was really important to me. And, you know, I really valued that period of time. And I was like, oh, I don't even care if you want to make a web series anymore. I'm just glad that you felt good about getting to like ask questions and, you know, not feel silly for being a student. And that was a very heartwarming moment to not only see her like come to life in a kind of production that she wasn't anticipating enjoying, and was actually actively opposed to, but also feeling like she had finally found a safe space where, you know, she could exercise some of the like preconceptions that she'd had in a place where there was no judgment.
Well, thank you all three for sharing these moments, because in some way they go kind of at the heart of what teaching can be, kind of this creating the supportive and nurturing space, also making these long-term connections, right? So students come back to you, they ask for recommendations even years later, you kind of help them with their baby steps, and, you know, then they start feeling empowered. So there's something beautiful about, you know, being in the classroom and being able to kind of help others get into that space where they feel like, I can actually do this, right? So hopefully some of the folks who've listened in get kind of a taste of what, you know, what drives teachers to do this, and also, you know, how you can kind of combine those two kind of passions, the teaching and the filmmaking. I think we're right at the end of our time now.
Yep.
So I love spending time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Chicago and Illinois Film Office and Seton Spark again. All right, we'll sign off then.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
And now Taveri needs to close down our live stream here.
Oh, we're dropping like flies. Taveri, you're muted.
Of course I am. It wouldn't be a Zoom day or a streaming day if I wasn't. I'm ending the broadcast very soon. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Inez, Bree. Looks like the rest of our panel has left. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you at the next sustainability conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.